What is Jewish music?
Mary, light my mind.
Is that Jewish music?
Well, what is Jewish music?
Check it out. My grandfather and I would sit in the old synagogue in the interval between early and late evening prayers, and we'd talk quietly. It was then that he would tell me legends about the ancient sages and later heroes, about important events that happened long ago and in more recent times.
Once there was a Tzadik who was on a journey somewhere. I think his name was Reb Elimelech. Well, he traveled and traveled, but he couldn't seem to get anywhere. Since the Sabbath was creeping up on him, Reb Elimelech started to look for a place where he could stay. Still, he didn't succeed and had no choice but to travel further.
Still haven't figured out what songs I'm gonna do.
Several hours went by.
It's getting a little late.
It was getting dark, so Reb Elimelech began to pray with great passion, the way such a tzaddik does.
What's the story with this? There was someone traveling on the road, and he
It's a spooky story.
the spooky story. He sang, "Aya da da ya ya da da da," and from the distance he heard like a voice going,
In the middle of the night, traveling from his Rebbe to his hometown.
Resounded to the heavens. Just then he saw a man coming. The man approached and asked him if he wanted to spend the Sabbath with him, to which our man replied, "Well, why not?" The stranger warned Reb Elimelech that when they got where they were going, he must not ask questions. In fact, no matter what he might see, he must not make the slightest sound. They went on their way. They went on their way, and the Tzadik saw a wonderful palace in the distance. The stranger took him up to its door and opened it. The room inside was so beautiful that Reb Elimelech's eyes were dazzled. Then he heard music. He heard music that seemed to be played by a fine band of klezmer musicians, and it was so lovely it almost overwhelmed him. door opened, and several prayer quorums came in and began to sing with radiant faces. An old man whose gray beard reached to his chest moved forward and recited the Sabbath service in such sweet tones that he seemed to be entirely transformed. As the prayers were finished, the old man was given a golden goblet of wine. With smiling eyes, he received the wine and blessed it. When he was done with the blessing, a woman's voice was heard to say, Amen.
It started out from this thing of trying to reduce the language down to a few cries. Was the thing when Schoenberg wrote about Webern's 6 bagatelles for string quartet, and he said that what Webern did was reduce a whole novel into a single sigh. So it was like we were trying to reduce a whole ethnic group into a single cry. One little pathetic cry. But we started out that it actually, you could hear it like being like klezmer. Yeah, da, 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 da. But by now, then after that, it was like I didn't want to be stuck with that. So gradually it just turned into without all the da 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 before it, just the alone, just the and then we tried to build a language out of that. We tried to build a language, but that's where it comes from. In its primordial roots, it's extremely based. It couldn't exist without the Jewish music and without the Jewish culture.
So what I'm doing is I'm taking various elements of other forms of reharmonizing some of the tunes. And ultimately what it does, it becomes a different form of expression, but it's rooted in the understanding of what the music is, what it's supposed to do, and certainly rooted in the emotional quality of the music. So like I say, I can take tune A and play it very traditionally, or play it in a whole other type of setting. And for me, both are valid. Still, there's always the question of how much you can mess with the tradition that you inherited, and that's really, you have responsibility to. And keep the music alive, have it say what it's supposed to do.
Later, he was led into a room even more beautiful than the first. He was seated beside other men at the table that had sparkling place settings.
Vahi erev, vahi voker. Yom hashishi, vayuchulu hashemayim v'oretz v'chol sevom. V'achal Elokim bayom hashvi, malachto asher asa. Vayishbos bayom hashvi, mukom malachto asher asa. Vayvorach Elokim es yom hashvi, v'kadesh asa. Kivo shavas mechol, malachto asher Elokim lasos. Three. Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, Borei pri hagafin.
You're eating it.
Of course.
You don't consider that meat.
I get for some of these ones with the heavy fat.
I think I need another Coke, believe it or not.
Yeah, the Coke's are going down.
There's especially if this.
Oh, what more in? That's great.
What is that?
What is that? I don't know, but I guess we'll cook it up.
Put it
Cook
in.
it up and we'll see what it turns into.
Sea lions.
Albert Eiler clone.
As for the food, his first bite sent a rush of pleasure coursing through his limbs. When the meal was done, everyone at the table sang once more.
That's like a traditional klezmer doina. Traditional is a complicated word. Tradition is moving on now. We are making a new tradition now. Those of us who the tradition is moving along, but this would be, say, a doina. You could hear something like that, say, in the 1920s or 30s or 40s, a doina that might sound like that. Now, I might take that same kind of melody, and instead of, all right, go. Something like that.
I'd like to introduce my equipment. This is my amplifier. It's an Ampeg amplifier with one 12-inch speaker in it. I just bought it a few weeks ago, but it resembles my first amplifier that I had when I was 14. And you can see all the hopes. It looks kind of like a toaster, a modern toaster from the late 50s, even though they were made in the mid-60s. It shows a lot of the hopes of the time. And I like it a lot. I'd like to introduce this guitar. This guitar is a Stratocaster. This thing is called a Wanger bar. No, actually, it's called a tremolo bar. This is a recent Stratocaster, but it's an imitation of a 1956 Stratocaster, which is very similar to the one that Ike Turner played some quite amazing things on in the 50s.
There's something still in the oral image which does correspond to what we imagine Jewish music to sound like in terms of scales. And I've tried to have it be just almost like the way you can, there's such a thing as a blues guitar sound, like you're, and you don't need to hear more. You don't need to hear the whole 12 bars to feel the blues. There's a kind of sound of a cry, what people call the cry of jazz or the cry of blues. So it's more like trying to distill Jewish music in that sense. I wouldn't say it's my only intention in Self-Haters. I mean, basically, I'm doing the music which matters to me, which I kind of am a certain very reduced, very distilled language that I would believe in, I think, even if I wasn't Jewish or whatever. But at the same time, I can't say that the Jewish tropes are not essential to it. I think that they're really essential. I think they're really central. I hear them. If somebody doesn't hear them and likes the music, this is also fine. If somebody doesn't hear them and hates the music, I guess this is fine also. If somebody does hear them and it doesn't make any difference, they still hate the music, I guess this is also fine.
Großstadtmusik was almost always in the articles. Now that's very interesting because, in fact, although klezmer is now being constructed as folk music, before the war, it was called, well, in Hungary, for example, it was called urbanisch, urban music. It was seen as like another variety of jazz. It was distinctly thought of as what was not Volk. It was what was not the Volk music. It was big city music.
In its essence, all this music is a spiritual form of music used for religious reasons or as a form of worship. By and large, klezmer music is really taken out of context nowadays. It's difficult for people, if they're not in a traditional community, to understand the context of the music and what its function is. And it becomes sort of an isolated part out of a whole picture. But it's difficult for people to really understand what the whole picture is. there are many different, cultural examples of different traditional Jewish societies, and just amongst the East European Jews, you have many, many different cultural manifestations of the same thing, but in different guise, different dress. But I think unless it's connected to the Torah, it's not going to have that much longevity. And I think that history really bears that out very dramatically. I think if anyone with an open mind will look at various movements in Judaism over the last 2,000 years, most of the movements that were, or all the movements that were basically not attached to Torah wound up basically being not Jewish and becoming something else.
I think that it's a very personal thing to make a statement, klezmer music has to be connected to religion. I think that's personal for each person. I think that certainly that issue has come up in my mind. I play klezmer music and I go, wow, it leads there somehow. It leads there. I guess what it leads to is, what does it mean to be Jewish? And then so one starts to ask the question, like, well, does it mean, is it totally meaningless without the religion?
Jews have a particular relation to defining themselves because they're always in a culture and outside. Like, say, like black people, they never can not be black. It's obvious that they're black, and it really depends on what is the attitude of the dominant culture where they are, how well it works, But like Jews, it's like, what makes a Jew a Jew? It's like something that fascinates people. People are always saying like, but you're not religious, so why do you even put the yoke on yourself? You could just groove. I mean, it's like, and I just think, well, what the hell is that supposed to mean?
Reb Elimelech was quite confused and got more and more curious about what kind of thing happened to him. He was tempted again and again to ask what sort of place this was. But always he stopped himself, remembering what he had been told.
It's wonderful, let's go.
A while later, the guide came over and said, "Follow me. I'll show you where to sleep."
Fine, human being. Fine, I'll take your coat. Out of here. Good person. Don't forget your trombone. Okay, good? Come. Oh, you're stuck in here. Go. Come.
As he followed the man, he wondered whether he ought to say something now, but he restrained himself.